Good evening and welcome to Newsmakers, a co-production by NTD and the Epoch Times. It's official. The United States Supreme Court has paused the expiration of Title 42. The move comes after 19 states filed an emergency application for a stay, arguing that if Title 42 expired, illegal crossings would skyrocket. Here's Democratic Congressman Vicente Gonzalez on how the expected end of Title 42 will impact Texas.
Well, clearly it's a huge concern all along the South Texas border where migrants have been building up on the other side of the border, and a heavy lift for small communities like McAllen, like Brownsville, like Weslaco, like Harlingen, and all the way down the river to handle. As you know, many of these communities have to use their own tax dollars to address the problem immediately, and sometimes it takes years to be reimbursed by the federal government.
The White House, meanwhile, wants the Supreme Court to change its mind, saying the justices should reject the emergency bid to keep Title 42 in effect, at least while legal challenges play out. The government asked the court to keep it in place until at least December 27th. There is no deadline for a ruling. Title 42 will remain in effect until the justices act. As a quick refresher, Title 42 is an immigration policy that allows officials to rapidly expel migrants during a health emergency. It's been used countless times at the southern border and is credited with helping keep illegal immigration numbers low. Low being a relative term here, as illegal crossings are at record highs. But apparently those numbers can get even higher. Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich said in a news release that if Title 42 is lifted, unlawful crossings are estimated to surge from 7,000 per day to as many as 18,000. And joining us to discuss the Supreme Court's latest move is Todd Bensman, Senior National Security Fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. Todd, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Todd, can you take us through what's happening with Title 42?
I mean, this really amounts to just some legal wrangling that inevitably is going to end only one way, which is that Title 42 is going to be lifted, because it was never intended as a permanent fix, and it certainly was never intended as an immigration policy. That's a public health code. So once we're out of the public health crisis, Title 42 is supposed to go away, but it turned out to be a crutch for the Biden administration as one of the last impediments, one of the last barriers of any sort to an unmitigated open border, because they were still using it to push back about 40 to 50% of everybody who crossed. The other 50%, by the way, was so gigantic that it was the biggest mass migration crisis that we've ever had for 2 years straight, just on that 50%. So you can imagine what's going to happen when the other 50% can come too. And that's really what the big problem is here.
And Todd, you mentioned those numbers, and it seems illegal border crossings are at record highs. So how has Title 42 been stemming that tide?
Well, the way Title 42 has been used is as a blocker against people claiming asylum. Title 42 is all about one thing. It's a membrane, a barrier between the people that it is applied to and their ability to cross the border and claim asylum. They want to claim asylum because asylum gets them into the country immediately and forever. It's a permanent, claim of persecution, but it's a permanent by de facto default. It becomes permanent. You can't get them out. They don't leave. They just stay permanently in the country, and that's why they want it. That's why the people who don't want mass migration want to keep it, and why the people who want unfettered mass migration want to get rid of it, because that's what it's all about. So once it's available, asylum to the masses, we should see a very, very significant flood of people into the country.
And Todd, it seems we've been seeing all of these, numbers coming out in reports, and we're seeing the migrants lining up at the border. So once Title 42 does end, depending on when that is, what happens next?
Well, then what you should start to see is a lot more of what you're seeing right now, which is that the administration is allowing people to cross and not be detained as required by law, and not be expelled and removed as required by law while they're in detention. This administration has eliminated detention and has eliminated almost all deportations from the interior, no matter what they say to the contrary. They're trying to say, oh, don't worry, we're going to put all those who don't qualify for asylum into removal proceedings. But there's 15 million people in the country who are in removal proceedings and have been for 20 years, 10, 20. I mean, the reality is that nobody gets removed, or very few people get removed, except maybe some hardened criminals. So you'll see people come across, they'll get processed, they'll be given a date to report in the interior somewhere to ICE in a year or 2 years, and then they'll be put on buses and planes, and they'll be distributed throughout America to cities and communities across America. That's already been happening for 2 years straight. We've probably got close to 3 million people inside the country who just cross the border and we let them in. No removal.
And Todd, it seems when it comes to this border crisis, most of the states that are in the news are Texas and Arizona, the border states. But is it every single state, or what really is happening here?
Yeah, Texas has been the epicenter of the mass migration crisis, the greatest mass migration crisis in U.S. history by far, and probably one of the greatest in the world, in history, world history. This is truly, on a scale that no country has really seen before, even during world wars. But the issue here is that we're going to not be able to catch this thing down until the policy changes. The policies of catch and release, of letting people in instead of turning them around and creating a deterrent to others.
Speaking of policies, under Trump there was the Remain in Mexico policy, and you mentioned how Title 42 isn't a policy, right? So what should a good policy look like to help those who are deserving of asylum enter, but keep the, say, less deserving or illegal ones out?
Right. Well, so for starters, the law is very clear about what is supposed to happen. Congressional statutes say that when somebody crosses illegally, you must detain them. It doesn't say you can or you're encouraged to. It says you must detain them, and you must keep them in detention throughout whatever their claims for asylum are. They must, and that then they must be removed. But we don't follow the law. This administration is not following the law. All prior Democratic administrations did a pretty good job of following the law. Nobody issued humanitarian paroles by the hundreds of thousands like they're doing now, or a pinky agreement that you're going to check in a year to some ICE office in Indiana. That has to stop. That has to stop. And the other thing is that the asylum law, which enables people who cross to just get in and released, that has to be fixed so that it only applies to people who come to the United States as their very first country. A lot of these immigrants are crossing, 10 different countries that are perfectly safe compared to where they came from, where they could apply for asylum. We had a policy like that called Third Safe Country under Trump. It was eliminated immediately on Inauguration Day for Biden. And if you have policies like that rein in the abuse of asylum, you will fix this problem overnight. That's what Title 42 did. It had the effect of blocking the asylum system from this mass abuse. And we're about to see that again. So most Democratic presidents, Barack Obama was called the deporter in chief. Bill Clinton was harsher on as a border security hawk than Trump. These guys would never have allowed anything that you're seeing right now. This is way outside of the Democratic Party mainstream.
Well, definitely incredible. Well, Todd Bensman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by Mark Ruskin. Mark spent 20 years as an FBI special agent, primarily undercover. He's here to discuss the FBI's involvement with Twitter. Hear what he has to say after the break.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true, but it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
NTD's Capital Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American Congressman Graves? Thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here so you are in the know.
Navigating a world of economic madness, you need to have the right guide. What do today's decisions mean for your tomorrow? We ask why. What's the alternative? Uncover the deeper reasons and the hidden influences, and highlight the real opportunities for profit. At NTD Business, we connect the dots for you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. NTD Business. I'm Paul Green.
At The Nation Speaks, we don't just scratch the surface. We want to go wide and deep. Our viewers come away with a much richer understanding of the issues of the day. We really make a big effort to bring on different voices onto the show. We don't just talk to experts and newsmakers, which of course are extremely important, but we also want to hear from the American people. So the people who are impacted by the policies and issues that we're talking about, because what they have to say is just as important to the national conversation.
Welcome back. In a story that seems more fitting for communist China, we now know our government worked to suppress and disappear dissenting voices on social media. Those revelations are thanks to Elon Musk, specifically that the FBI colluded with Twitter to silence voices talking about Hunter Biden, the COVID-19 origins, vaccine safety concerns, possible election integrity questions. You name it. If the government didn't like it, it told Twitter to get rid of it, and Twitter did. But the FBI is saying that's not what happened. Responding to the Twitter files, the FBI told Fox News, quote, "We never direct or ask them to take action." In either case, what does this mean for every American concerned with their right to exercise free speech? Joining us to discuss the FBI's involvement revealed in the latest Twitter files is Mark Ruskin. Mark spent 20 years as an FBI special agent, primarily undercover, and is the author of The Pretender, My Life Undercover for the FBI. He's also a former assistant district attorney. Mark, thanks for joining us. Great to see you again.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Mark, as a former FBI agent and prosecutor, you know how the FBI works, or how it's supposed to work. What's your take on the FBI's involvement with Twitter?
Well, it seems that their response that you just quoted to Fox News is somewhat disingenuous. In view of the multitude of communications between and the emails between the FBI senior upper management officials and the Twitter managers, it's clear that it was much more than just a wink and a nod that was going on here in terms of seeking some kind of action. It wasn't just a question of informing Twitter that someone may have violated their policies. I mean, what kind of action is that? It seems hard to swallow, really.
And Mark, with these revelations coming out, is it just Twitter, or what's likely happening between the government and other social media platforms?
Well, I would suggest that this is probably just the tip of the iceberg, and that we're going to find that there was other interaction between the official government agencies, such as the Bureau and Homeland Security and other tech giants. What's going to be necessary to occur right now, or as soon as possible, is some kind of investigations. Congressional investigations would be appropriate. Also, an investigation by the Department of Justice, Office of Inspector General, and perhaps a special counsel. I mean, this really is exactly the kind of situation that calls out for a special counsel to find out who was involved, and more importantly at this point, who authorized these in the government, who authorized these intrusions into the constitutionally protected rights of the individuals whose accounts were highlighted and were flagged by the Bureau and other agencies.
And Mark, it seems with these revelations, the big question here is this an abuse of power by the FBI?
Well, it clearly has the appearance of impropriety. And a full investigation would show whether or not there was an abuse of authority. I mean, it certainly appears likely that the line was crossed here between what is appropriate behavior in a democracy, where you expect a federal law enforcement agency to be independent and objective. Here it certainly appears that the line's been crossed, and that independence and objectivity were cast aside, at least by the upper managers, perhaps not by field agents, but by the people up on the higher ranks who make these kinds of calls.
And Mark, with these revelations, what is this telling us about the freedom of speech in America?
Well, it seems, I think an argument can be made that it's in danger right now. 20, 30 years ago, there was a unanimity in terms of believing that speech, especially political speech, expression of beliefs or religious speech, was sacrosanct and could not be interfered with. And now, with the insertion of the concept of misinformation, in quotes, I would say misinformation, in order to justify what Marcuse called repressive tolerance, which is to say, when you argue that there should be freedom of speech, however, some speech needs to be restricted for the good of society, that's the way that they're kind of like easing in the back door, is by qualifying certain speech as harmful to society and thus deserving of control and limits. And once you introduce that concept, then the question becomes, who determines what is misinformation? Who determines what's good speech or bad speech? And that's where it becomes very dangerous. Once speech starts to be regulated, then it's a slippery slope into a totalitarian state, and it's very dangerous.
Mark, it does bring to mind George Orwell's Animal Farm, right? Like all animals are created equal, but some are more equal. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And later tonight, Devin Nunes, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, is joining us for more on the Twitter files. And coming up right after the break, China's sudden reversal in COVID policy. What does this mean for the people there, and what's globally at stake? We'll be hearing from former Brigadier General Robert Spalding. We'll be right back. Welcome back. A sudden reversal in China, ensuing chaos. The communist regime lifting its draconian virus policy, but is now the right time? Despite the lifting of the lockdown orders, many streets remain empty. Projections saying China could see over 2 million or more dying from the sudden reversal. Funeral homes already seeing sky-high demand. And the regime only classifying COVID deaths as those caused by pneumonia and respiratory failure. That's in contrast to here in the U.S., where every deceased person who tested positive for the virus was counted as a COVID-19 death. Now, the Chinese regime touted its zero COVID policy of locking down whole districts when one case was discovered as an example to the world of the effectiveness of totalitarian states. But is that panning out? Here to help us make sense of all of this is Epoch Times contributor and former Brigadier General Robert Spalding. General Spalding is also a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. General, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again.
Thank you. Great to be back.
With the sudden reversals we're seeing in China in terms of dealing with the pandemic, do you think the zero COVID policy was even effective in combating the virus?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, first of all, you can't trust any of the data coming out of China. The other issue is the fact that many of the people that China terrified with all of its propaganda are still terrified. They don't want to come out of their house, even though the Chinese Communist Party said it's safe to do so. I think there's other issues with regard to, what the actual results of the coronavirus has been over the last over 2 years. So I think many of the ideas coming out of what's happening in China are, quite frankly, just that, ideas, because the country is so difficult to understand because the Chinese Communist Party does a good job of obfuscating what's happening.
On that note, what can we learn from the Chinese regime's response to the pandemic in terms of how the regime operates? What does it mean for us?
Well, clearly they're looking to understand and control the population. I think the problem that we're finding with regard to what they did, over the last 2+ years with the coronavirus is they, instilled their population with terror. So now the Chinese Communist Party is hoping to turn the country back on economically. Xi Jinping at the G20, Xi Jinping meeting with country leaders, trying to say, hey, China's back in business. But hold on, China's not back in business. As we saw in the Foxconn plant, the Chinese people now are, terrified. So the idea that, China could spring back economically really quickly just by saying, hey, everything's good to go. I think part of the problem that they're finding is they have so instilled in the Chinese people this idea that you have to fear the coronavirus that they're unwilling to actually come out and actually do or get back to normal. So while democracies have gotten back to normal for the most part after coronavirus, I think you're going to find that China has a really hard time doing so because of how much they pushed zero COVID.
And to your point, General, we are seeing that kind of playing out in China right now, right? Like they're telling people, millions of them, to go to work if they just have mild symptoms. You're seeing medicine not like on the shelves. Where do you see all of this going?
Well, the problem with China's health system is the fact that for the most part, when you get sick, you go to a hospital. When I lived there, the clinics that you could go to were mostly Western run. Otherwise, people would go to hospitals, which is completely different than it is here in the United States. Often you go to a clinic or a doctor's office. But in China, everybody goes to the hospital. So as you know, if the hospital becomes jammed with COVID patients, and then other people with mild illnesses come to the hospital, now you've got a recipe for really having difficulty dealing with everything because the hospital system is overwhelmed.
And what can we expect in terms of human cost, but also economic cost?
Well, again, I think the idea that China's economy is going to be dominant has really been inflicted a real blow. I think it's part of the secondary reaction to the coronavirus. And so I think they're going to have a hard time getting out of this. I think in terms of, human consequences, again, very, very hard to tell. We don't know for sure what the data is coming out of China because the Chinese Communist Party, again, hides everything.
And it seems in some ways, there are reports saying, oh, if this goes very badly, this sudden lifting, the regime can just blame the protests or say, look how good the COVID policies were. We were keeping numbers down. How do you see that part playing out?
Well, the Chinese Communist Party can do no wrong. Well, what people have to understand is in China, the Chinese Communist Party is religion. It is everything. And so the idea that the Chinese Communist Party could make a mistake is just not something that the party is willing to admit to. So they will find other excuses, or they will essentially use the media, the internet, which they completely control, to drive the messaging to the areas that they want. So whatever the truth is, the Chinese Communist Party concocts and then enforces their own truth. So, with that type of system, it's very hard to find out where is truth, where is fact, and where is fiction, because quite frankly, in China and with the Chinese Communist Party, truth is whatever the party says it is.
And as you mentioned earlier, right, many of the citizens there are still very fearful. The streets are empty despite the lockdowns being lifted. But in summary, any last words on this topic?
Well, I think, the horrible outcome of coronavirus can be pinned on the Chinese Communist Party. And, unfortunately, when you do things like that, they have repercussions. I think we're seeing the first repercussion of, I think, what was in the beginning a very good strategy for China in terms of dominating the supply chain and ensuring that, it looked like China had a better model than the Western model. Unfortunately, when you play with fire, in other words, when you use manipulation of the narrative to your own ends, and when you start to see that the facts don't fit that narrative, then it starts to look like your model may not be so good. So I think one of the good things for democracies is this actually gives us an opportunity to see, hey, this is not always going to go in China's favor. That gives us an ability to then go out and say, hey, we should think differently about how we should organize our societies, and maybe China's model isn't so good after all.
General Spalding, thanks for joining us. Always great to have you.
Thank you.
And coming up right after the break, we are joined by National Weather Service meteorologist John Moore, who's here to discuss the impending bomb cyclone. What exactly is a bomb cyclone, and how can you prepare for it? Find out after the break.
The lasting beauty of realistic oil painting. Brilliant, expressive, and inspirational. The 6th NTD International Figure Painting Competition. Guided by pure authenticity, beauty, and goodness. Invites you to join us on a journey back to traditional art. The Gold Award is $10,000. For more details, please visit oilpainting.ntdtv.com.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
Welcome back. Gather your blankets and make sure you have backup water and food. A major winter storm is blasting the United States, and it's going to be cold. We're talking wind chills in the 30 to 45 below zero cold. In fact, the National Weather Service is calling this storm a once-in-a-generation type event and warning that it'll cripple travel on one of the year's busiest travel days. It could even prove deadly if you get stuck in blizzard conditions. Joining us to discuss this blast of cold Arctic air is John Moore, meteorologist with the National Weather Service. John, thanks for joining us.
It's nice to be here.
So it seems 90 million people are under a winter weather alert and more than 200 million under a wind chill alert. What can we expect from this storm?
So the main thing with this storm is going to be the blistery cold air mass associated with it as a cold front, a really strong Arctic front, sweeps through the eastern 2/3 of the country. And we're going to see records broken for a lot of places, far north as the Intermountain West and Northern Plains and as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. So most Americans will be impacted by this storm. Not only is it going to be impactful as far as cold weather is concerned, there are also going to be blizzard conditions associated with the storm that could lead to whiteout conditions in some areas and make travel really dangerous, if not impossible, for some locations. So a very impactful storm during some of the busiest travel days of our year.
And John, this storm is expected to become a bomb cyclone on Thursday evening going into Friday. Can you explain what exactly that is?
All right, so a bomb cyclone. With this storm right here, it's currently it's a cold front sweeping from the north. A lot of Canadian air mass, a cold Canadian air mass behind it. Well, on the northern side of the storm, there's going to be a low pressure center develop along the northern north of this front. And as far as when we say bomb, we mean that it's going to the pressure associated with this low center is going to rapidly decrease over the next 24 hours. It's going to decrease at least 1 millibar for every hour over the next 24 hours. So that's the definition of a bomb cyclone. So the low pressure associated with the storm is just going to get deeper and deeper as it moves across the Great Lakes, and that's going to, result in some heavy snowfall and very strong winds across the Great Lakes and even the Northeast as this bomb cyclone quickly crosses the Great Lakes and moves off, ejects back north and impacts the east coast of the United States as well.
And John, so on top of the wind and the cold, what can we expect over this Christmas weekend?
Wind, cold, very extreme cold. Also be a chance of some heavy rainfall and maybe even some instances of some flooding along the east coast in the warm sector of this very powerful front as it pushes across the country. And again, I just want to stress the impacts of the cold and how broad of an area this cold will impact. And also regarding the wind, blizzard conditions, also going to be a chance of some coastal flooding along the east coast and maybe even some lake effect enhanced snowfall along the Great Lakes. So the system, it's going to bring a lot of different impacts with it. It's going to impact a lot of Americans. And outside of this system, also in the Pacific Northwest, we can see several systems push on shore over the next several days. And there could be some chance of some icing in the Pacific Northwest over the next 7 days from a separate system. So we want to keep that in mind as well for all of Americans who live in the Pacific Northwest.
And John, given all of this, what can people do to best prepare for this storm?
To prepare, you have to know what you're expecting because, like I said, there's going to be a lot of impacts associated with this storm. So look up wherever you get your weather information from. Check and see what your forecast is and what you're going to expect. Is it going to be cold temperatures? Are you going to expect blizzard conditions? Are you going to expect flooding? And prepare accordingly. If most people are going to be impacted by cold. So I definitely want to tell everyone to have a plan in place in case power goes out. How will you keep warm if power goes out? If you're going to be impacted by blizzard conditions, should you travel? Or how are you going to travel? Keep all of that in mind. If you're going to travel in snow and blizzard conditions, make sure you have an emergency kit in your car. And like I said, prepare based on the impacts that are expected for your area.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us and helping shed light on this.
Thank you guys for having me, and stay safe and happy holidays.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by former Congressman Devin Nunes. Devin now leads former President Donald Trump's Truth Social, and he is here to discuss what we are learning from the latest Twitter files. You won't want to miss it.
NTD's Capitol Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American? Congressman Graves, thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here.
Freedom is not free, and neither is the truth. In order to bring you the facts, our reporters are out there on the front lines getting the true story. Some of them served 10 years of prison in China. We've been censored on social media. Our Hong Kong printing offices were set on fire, and we've been repeatedly attacked by the Chinese Communist Party. But no matter what, we believe that you deserve the truth, and so we'll continue to bring the truth to light. Head on over to getepic.com and try honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
Welcome back. More and more revelations are coming out on Twitter, and the latest eye-openers are just as concerning as the previous ones. In the latest Twitter files drop, courtesy of Elon Musk, we learned that Twitter quietly aided and directly assisted U.S. military psychological operations. Or to put it simply, Twitter was pushing state-run propaganda. And all of this happened after the social media giant testified before Congress and agreed to shut down such networks. Joining us to discuss this latest development is former Congressman and head of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes. Devin is now the CEO of Truth Social. Devin, thanks for joining us. Great to see you again.
Great to be with you. Merry Christmas.
So with these latest Twitter files, you were the head of the House Intelligence Committee, so apparently the U.S. military was targeting several Middle Eastern countries, and Twitter was helping. What do you make of Twitter assisting the military with PSYOPs?
Well, look, this all have to be explained. We don't know exactly what all that means, but I think one thing that doesn't have to be explained, and what's in the news today, is the FBI making a statement that essentially denying that they had a relationship with Twitter and that they were actively looking to ban or suppress accounts, including some press accounts. And as you guys know very well, Epoch Times, how much you guys have been suppressed all over the globe. So the fact that the FBI would be linking arms with big tech, I think it's something we all knew, but we didn't know the extent, and we didn't know they'd be paying for it. So as it relates to the military, I think there's a lot more that we need to know there that need to be disclosed. And I think what Elon Musk really should do is just release all the documents so everyone can see them, and you can have many more reporters than just the few that have gone through them. For example, we would love for Epoch Times to be able to go through them all, and we'd love for Congress to be able to go through them all.
And Devin, earlier this week, Just the News reported that the DOJ demanded Google turn over personal email and phone data from at least 2 senior Intelligence Committee lawyers working for you during the congressional probe. That unraveled a now disproven Russia collusion narrative. So tell us about this.
Yeah, look, what they were doing is reverse spying. And I think for your viewers to know, this is in late 2017 at the time that I had subpoenaed the DOJ and the FBI for documents for their involvement in the Russia hoax. Now, it's all common knowledge now that the FBI, DOJ, the Democratic National Party, they were all in cahoots together, taking made-up phony dirt and taking it before a FISA court. Now, at that time, nobody knew that publicly. We knew that. The FBI and DOJ knew that we knew that. They knew they were under investigation by us. So what do? They don't have the guts to go to a grand jury and get a subpoena on me. What they do is they go and they target my lawyers so they can try to figure out what we knew, when we do it, what were we going to do with the information. It wasn't like they were after a search of some crime. What they were really after was intelligence and potentially blackmail to figure out how they could stop the information that ultimately, just a few months after that point that they had their subpoenas on my team and my staff, they went, we were able to make that public for the American people to know. And now it's kind of old news. Everybody's known it since 2018. And of course, everybody says nobody's paid the price. And I think that's exactly the question here is nobody's paid the price. And I want to know, my former staff want to know, and I think members of Congress that are still there, that were there at the time, also want to know, what was the predicate here for spying on us? So I'm going to look at every legal avenue that I can to hopefully shine some light on this continued corruption and denial by the Department of Justice.
Devin, you mentioned how they were basically potentially looking for something to blackmail you with, and you're ending on the legal part. So what were the legal grounds? Were there any legal grounds, or is that still what we're trying to figure out?
Well, that's just the thing. I think what you're going to find is the people that were involved in getting this warrant, okay, and going to the grand jury are the very same people that we were investigating. They must have all been related, because you would have to assume for me not to have been told. I mean, look, it's a serious issue. If I've got staff that work for me that are handling the nation's highest secrets, if I have staff that is somehow doing something wrong, you should have come to me and told me. Now, the only way they could have possibly gotten around that is by using the so-called National Security Division to essentially accuse my staff, my team, essentially me, of being some type of agent of Putin of some kind. There's no other way around this. They have a duty and a responsibility. If there are staffers that are involved in some shenanigans or nefarious activity, they should have come to me immediately. Look, that never happened. So the only thing you can possibly gather from this is that there was no valid predicate. It was a lie because, clearly they had no evidence that anybody on my staff were Russian agents or anything of the sort. So they were there for, only the only two logical reasons. They were there to grab intelligence on us as we were conducting our investigation, and two, to look for anything they could possibly do to find blackmail so that they could stop this information from coming out and their involvement from coming out. Because look, a lot of these people should have been in jail. They're not. They haven't been prosecuted. We've only seen one lawyer that's actually pled guilty that worked for the DOJ and the FBI. It's unfortunate, but look, maybe this dirt will come out and maybe eventually someone will pay a price.
And on that note, Devin, do you see, with the new Congress coming in January, do you see some action happening there? Will there be like a special counsel investigating? Where do you see all of this going?
Look, I think that the Congress is going to have to take this seriously, especially because this happened to the Republicans. The Republicans now, come January, are going to control the House. They're going to be conducting investigations. So you have to remember, going back to 2017, what did they do? 16 and 17, they went before a FISA court. They lied. They worked with the Democrats. They used phony made-up dirt to go out and spy on the Trump campaign. Then, as we were investigating them, what did they do? They don't say, oh, wow, maybe we should take a step back here, come clean up this mess. No, they double down and they spy on my staff. They go one step further and they go to a grand jury in Washington, D.C. and get a subpoena. And then, they cover up the Hunter Biden laptop from hell story. Then they plant, we hear all this stuff about January 6th. What do? They put informants out there. They run informants out there on January 6th trying to incite violence that we still don't have a reckoning for. So the Republicans in Congress should take notice that because they're next on the menu. Those of us that have served, we've done our duty, we've done our job. We're now out in the private sector trying to still do good things. But if they did all this stuff over the last 5, 6, 7 years, God only knows what they'll do to the Republicans in Congress. I mean, look, they raided Mar-a-Lago. They raided a former president's house claiming to have national security implications, documents, classified documents, which the whole time was ridiculous because classified documents just don't grow legs and run off. You know, they should have been able to easily go get a warrant and go to a judge and say, look, we're looking for document 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They didn't do that. So I knew from the very beginning that whole thing was a charade and a lie. So if I'm a Republican in Congress now looking at these investigations into the Biden administration, into the DOJ, and into the FBI, nothing stopped them for the last 6 or 7 years. I'd watch out if I were them.
And Devin, given that you were the head of intelligence during all of this, what does that mean for the state of our country if you and your people were being investigated, basically?
Yeah, look, I think that's the very point, right? I mean, this was back, you're talking about the 2017 and 18 timeframe. That's been a while ago. And if they were willing to do that, and we're the ones that are charged with the nation's top secrets, we're supposed to be overseeing these people. We're supposed to be conducting these types of investigations. It should be the norm. That pattern of behavior to go and attack us, to spy, to play all these games, I think that's really the point here that I think the Republicans in Congress need to be aware of. If they're willing to do it to me as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, one of the few people that can actually conduct investigations into these folks, God only knows what they do to the rest of them.
And Devin, it seems when it comes to, say, Hunter Biden's laptop, the COVID-19 vaccine efficacy concerns, the January 6th, all of these things, lots of media reports seems, to point that it was the media doing all of that. But now with these Twitter files, it seems we're finding out the government was really behind the scenes. So what does this mean in terms of free speech to Americans?
Well, what you're going to see, too, is, we're only seeing these Twitter files, which the FBI is in denial today, saying that it's a conspiracy theory. But that's just Twitter. Let's think about Facebook, Instagram, other tech companies, and look, the media has also been involved in this, too. Remember, when I go back and you think about 2017 and the whole Russia hoax, I used to like to say at the beginning of that, I would have to stop at numerous press conferences and I would say, wait a second here, guys. There's no evidence of Trump or Republicans colluding with Vladimir Putin and Russia. But what we do know is that there was an illegal leak of classified information because General Flynn, people remember General Flynn, high-ranking general, was coming on as a national security advisor for incoming President Trump. And his conversations spilled all over the press. There were supposedly 9, according to the press at the time, there were 9 sources. So now you have to ask yourself, was the press in on it? And I think the answer is yes. And so the FBI, DOJ, the left, the Democrats, they all have a nice cabal there in the swamp in Washington, D.C. And I think we uncovered that. We unearthed it. And now, will the Republicans that are there now, will they do their job to try to continue search for the truth, no pun intended, but and get to the bottom of this and then ultimately hold people accountable because it's not like there's nothing at stake here. It's really our nation is at stake. And you can't have a democratic republic will not survive with a 2-tiered justice system where Democrats are treated totally different than Republicans. And that's what you have happening right now in the nation's swamp and all over the country as it relates to justice.
Quite incredible. Well, Devin, thanks for joining us. Great to have you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
And that's all from us here tonight on Newsmakers. We'll be back next Wednesday night with a brand new show. Until then, stay warm and safe travels to those braving the winter storm. Merry Christmas to those celebrating, and happy holidays to everyone else. Have a good night.